So what I'm going to do tonight is talk, as Malcolm mentioned, about how things have changed since my book that was published in 2016, so 9 years ago, but in fact included records up to 2015. So we've got 10 years since that book came out, and inevitably in that time, that's the book. Hopefully most of you have seen it or are aware of it. Copies are still available from the Hertfordshire Natural History Society and will be available, I think, at the Members' Day. But quite a few things have changed because inevitably, when any book is published, the moment it comes out, things change, and then over a number of years, things change even more. And although much of what I said hopefully is still relevant, there's a few things that have changed. So what I'm going to do is run through some of those, the good, the bad, and the pretty bad, as it was last year. But I'm also just going to make a slight diversion fairly early in the talk to talk about the 50th anniversary of the United Kingdom butterfly monitoring system, which is the backbone of a lot of our recording and the backbone of a lot of the detail that goes into a book like this or any other county butterfly atlas and description. So, as I'm sure, or I hope most of you are aware, as well as publishing the book 9 years ago, we also update that with our Herts and Middlesex Butterflies annual report, as we tend to call it. Though that sounds horrible, it sounds really dry, and I hope most people don't find the annual report really dry. But that means that we're continually keeping this book up to date. So although, as I say, there have been changes, we are documenting that, and that is available to members pretty well as well, usually in February. Always try and get it out well before the recording year, so you know what went on last year. But also builds up into quite a nice cumulative set of updates, and always try and choose a cover which is relevant and newsworthy to the content. So you can see there we've got quite a few updates. And that's all the ones published since
I got it.
Came out.
I got it.
So what has changed in Hertfordshire in the last 9 or 10 years? Well, it's quite interesting to review this. We've had 7.5% population increase. So not surprisingly, there's been much new housing around many towns. And obviously, as we know, there's going to be continuous development pressure. I suspect everyone in this talk is aware of new housing proposed and probably of protests and disagreements about how or whether it should be done. And certain towns, for instance, I know not too far from me, Buntingford, which is a pretty small town, is growing estates around the edge like no one's business and will soon become quite a large town at this rate. We've had Hartwood Forest, which was started by the Woodland Trust to try and rewild a great deal of arable farmland north of St Albans, and that's matured and has been extended onto the other side of the road and has now become from something new and interesting to probably one of the more significant butterfly environments in the county. Butterfly World closed for reasons which I won't go into here. I'm sure many of you know the controversies about it, but from our point of view, is obviously brought Hertfordshire butterflies into some focus around in a bigger area than just Hertfordshire, and of course famously provided a huge site and resource for the small blue, which had started to come back into the county. They are still seen around the edge of the site. The site itself is inaccessible, and luckily we have got other small blue sites around now. We've also seen a big growth in citizen science. There's always been citizen science, especially in Britain, which has a long history of amateur naturalists writing, investigating, recording, and so on. It's something that obviously in this country we can be very proud of. But I think citizen science has gone from being an enthusiasm of a few people to being something which is part of common parlance. And I'll talk about some of the changes that has made in another slide. Clearly, we had COVID-19 during 2020 and 2021, which made a lot more people aware of the countryside near to them because that was all they could visit. That had good effects in terms of making increasing awareness. Bad effects in that some of these people became aware of the local countryside and did their best to mess it up. But undoubtedly, there has been a residual encouragement to enjoy the countryside and therefore things like butterflies. And just on great butterfly conservation, particularly, I think over the last 10 years, we've gone from being fairly passive to engaging with lots of landowners and farmers, as well as all the conservation or other conservation organisations that we probably did have fair amount of engagement with. We've sort of been able to engage with the people who are actually managing a lot of the land, which isn't necessarily under special conservation measures, but is nonetheless important for butterflies. So how's recording changed? Well, one good thing from my point of view is how paper records have declined. You can see there that archive file was everything that came in on paper in 2016. And there is my 2024 file of things that came in on paper. And you can see the difference. And it doesn't really, 2024 was had fewer records than some of the previous years, but certainly those two proportions don't reflect the proportions of records that have come in over that period. And this is what has really changed. It's app-based recording. I record butterflies, the full iRecord system, the American system iNaturalist, which is used by quite a few people in Britain as well, and also other things like BTO's Bird Track, which although is principally used for recording birds, as you might imagine, also enables you to record other sets of organisms, and quite a few people who are out bird watching do actually put in records to do with butterflies. And these have revolutionized recording, and that's why the amount of paper I'm dealing with has declined to virtually nothing. And the good thing about these is it makes it easier for people to put records in. It also has enabled people to identify on the fly rather than having to take photographs and go back and look in books. Excuse me. And it also means that because the records go into an area where I as the county verifier, can see them, it means that you can feed back immediately if there's a question about something, rather than waiting till you get a list in October or November and saying, can you remember back 6 or 8 months when you said, are you sure? At least you can go back within a day or two. And one of the other good things, and I think he's on the talk here that I want to mention, is that this has also enabled, because it's all done remotely, us to have something called a verification assistant starting in the middle of last season. Davin, who I think is in this talk, who has taken a lot of the load off my plate, and I can only say many thanks to him for actually going through and helping to verify species and information that goes into these apps. And I think that's worked quite successfully. I hope he agrees. So let's just move on to the United Kingdom Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. You see it's got its own 50-year logo. And I just wanted to say about something about that. Obviously, we're going back to well before the 10-year period of the main part of this talk, but I think it's important to mention it because this coordinates all the transect and wider countryside butterfly recording schemes. And this is, as I say, is the 50th year of transect recording. Wider countryside didn't start until about 15 years ago. And in 1976, our branch area had only one transect, the one at Hampstead Heath. And indeed, butterfly conservation wasn't directly involved in transect recording. It was all under the Nature Conservancy Council. But by 2015, we had 62 transects, which is pretty good. That was an average that we'd had 60 or 70 for quite a few years. In 2024, we actually had a record 107 transects. These get covered. These cover various parts of the two counties to varying degrees. Some of them are very well covered, some of them not so well covered, but all of them represent volunteers who are prepared to go out week after week in the summer and record butterflies over a set route. And that provides us with the comparative information that gives us all the abundance figures. that we use, and which are an important measure. Not just, we also measure distribution, which can be done from records from anywhere, but the abundance information is rather more specialized. And it's interesting. I just dug out the other day the Nature Conservancy Council's report called Monitoring the Abundance of Butterflies 1976 to 1985, which came out 10 years after Transect started. And I just want to quote a little bit from it. This is on Hampstead Heath, which was, remember, the only one in our area. And it called this our only urban site. And, you know, Hampstead Heath is probably one of the least urban of the urban sites. But the interesting thing is that all the other 150 sites in this fairly thick book that they put out were genuinely rural sites. So it was immediately, you can see something unique which our branch had in its area. And of course now, particularly thanks to the project that's just finished on big city butterflies, a lot more transects have been started up all over inner London, not just in our area, Middlesex, but also in the other counties areas that cover inner London. And so urban areas are now very well covered with transects, as well as all the ones in rural areas. And we still have new transects start up. Unfortunately, a few are still quite lose resource. We've got one or two with vacancies at the moment, and if anyone is interested in taking over at, for instance, Albury Knowers or North or Great Wood, I would love to hear from them, because they are, particularly Albury Knowers is a very long running transect that at the moment doesn't have a walker for it after last year. And I mentioned the abundance for most species. But yeah, this is very valuable, and the UK BMS is the basis of many of the reports that you will see published in newspapers, learned journals, press releases, and so on, about how butterflies are doing. So now let's look at some species in our area and see what's happened. So the brown hair streak, what I've done is put in a map from all these, a map from 2015 to 19, which shows what was going on just after the book was published, and then a map for the last 10 years. And it's worth remembering that when my book was published, there weren't any records of brown hair streak in Hertfordshire or Middlesex. The first record came in 2016 down at Hatherop Park, right down by the river, near the River Thames in London Borough of Richmond. And you can see that in that first 5 years, there were a number of records in basically Western Middlesex. And then if we look up to 2020, 2024, you can see that it's still has very much a Western distribution, but it has spread across northeast, across the county. And of course, the great news is that it's now spread into Hertfordshire at places like Merry Hill, and one or two other sites this winter. So a lot of these records are based on a discovery of eggs, which is actually probably the easiest way of finding it, with egg hunts in the winter, if not the warmest and driest way of finding the butterfly. But then, you know, if you go to somewhere like Stafford Road open space, which is very urban, very close to South Ruislip Gardens Central Line station, it's quite easy now to find them flying around things like thistles, or sitting on leaves like nettle or oak, and the males, that is, looking for females flying by. And I mean, some of the egg hunts at sites, good sites like Stafford Road or Horsenden Hill, just to take a couple of examples, are now coming up with dozens and dozens of eggs. So there's no doubt that this butterfly is one of our success stories, and I can't see any reason why it shouldn't continue to spread up across the county. After all, Hertfordshire is full of blackthorn, and particularly in areas where there are still hedges. So how well it will do when it gets to the northeast of the county is perhaps a moot point. But I think over the coming years, we're going to see that increase. So it's good to have some good news to start with since the book was published. One interesting thing also, when the book was published, there was a record that was found near Ickenham, which had been included but with a very strong caveat that it didn't feel right, by Colin Plant in his Butterflies of the London area. And when I published this book, I felt the same about it. It seemed very early. But now we know that butterflies are flying earlier and earlier, and certainly it comes out now around about 20th of July, and that record was after that date, and it was actually at a site which may have been more or less where Stafford Road open space is. So it's just possible there was a tiny colony surviving there on the blackthorn hedges, but unbeknownst to anyone, because why would anyone go to Ruislip to find a rare butterfly? No insult to Ruislip, but a perfectly nice place, but it's not the obvious place to go. Now, the Adonis blue is a different sort of kettle of fish. It was almost certainly, I think it certainly was, an introduction, and without any licensing or authorization from the landowners at Thurfield Heath. But it's been in our area now, as you can see, since 2018. So it's gone through a fair number of broods, 2 broods a year, up to 2024, though there was a fall in numbers last year like there was for many species. But you can see that it's still got pretty good abundance. The graph in the middle is an abundance table, and you can see that the abundance went up to a peak around about 2020, and it's gone down since then. Whether that last year's drop was significant, we will only know after this summer. And it has gone now from being just on 1 or 2 bits of Thurfield Heath, particularly Church Hill, to occurring in pretty well every bit of Thurfield Heath if you look at the 20 to 24 map, and also a few records at Clothall Common, a bit further down the A505, which may well be a natural spread along the road. It's a beautiful butterfly, and we have to accept it is here. And a lot of people do go looking for it because it was historically at Thurfield Heath up to the 1940s, and then there was a long break. And I think we can rule out it naturally occurring in tiny numbers, because Thurfield Heath is one of the most visited parts of Hertfordshire. So many people go up there and look for butterflies. I can't believe it would have stayed under the radar from the late 1940s to the late 2010s. Now the Duke of Burgundy, we had great hopes for. There was just odd records. I think the last one when the book was published was about 2007 or 2009, and that was just an odd wanderer in West Hertfordshire. But in the early 2020s, 4 were seen at Albury Knowers at different points on the site. And Albury Knowers, right on the board, as you can see from the yellow dot on that map with Buckinghamshire, there are known colonies of the Duke of Burgundy just north of that at places like Pitstone Hill, Ivinghoe Beacon. And there was always the hope that they would spread south from there onto Albury Knowers, the Wildlife Trust Reserve. And so when we got 4 and it became the cover star of the annual report, we were quite excited. We went up there, we discussed with conservation advice with the Wildlife Trust, because unlike most chalkland butterflies, it has completely different wants. It needs more scrub. It needs cowslips or primroses growing in damp, shady areas with large leaves. So its conservation really goes against most of the conservation moves that you would make for most chalk downland butterflies. The unfortunate story is that since those 4 records 3 years ago, nothing has been seen. But we always live in hope that if we get a good summer, there may be some movement down, and it'd be great if a gravid female was to move into the area and lay eggs, and that they would produce some progeny for the next year. Whether it will, I don't know. It's a butterfly which is very much on the edge in this country. There have been successful moves to get it introduced in other areas, and we're hoping that it's under the Hertfordshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy, which Malcolm mentioned in his introduction. There may be some scope for developing habitat which will aid it. Okay. Now, small blue, I mentioned this under Butterfly World as being that primary site, and they are still found around the edges of it. But you can see that in 2011 to 2015, so up to the book, we had a few sites, mainly on the western side of the county, and one down at Tower Hamlets Cemetery Park, right down in the southeast, very much in built-up London, where a chalk bank and chalk garden had been built. And you can see the small blue does persist there in tiny numbers, which is good because it's completely separate from all the other records. But you can see there are many more sites now in the last 4 years, particularly up in the northeast of the county, where you can see there was nothing before the book was published, and now there's quite a few. And this is down to a lot of farmers in the barley area, particularly, have seeded margins and islands in their farmland with kidney vetch. We've assisted farmers as well to seed up other areas. And it's amazing how what is supposed to be in the books a fairly sedentary butterfly has managed to cross over quite a lot of arable farmland and set up colonies almost, but not exclusively, where kidney vetch has been sown and is growing. So this is no longer a really rare butterfly, but you can see it's always going to be restricted more or less to chalky areas, though introductions of kidney vetch at Heartwood Forest have been beneficial. And I'm going to be very interested to see, because near me, right in the middle of the county, a new part of road, the A602 near Watton Stone, was opened, which includes quite a deep cutting with not a lot of chalk, but that was seeded with kidney vetch last year. And it's going to be very interesting to see whether small blue has managed to sniff its way right across into the middle of the county, some way from any of the other sites to take over that area. So that's going to be interesting. But again, a butterfly that, with quite a lot of human help, it has to be said, in terms of giving it the opportunity to breed, has increased in the county. The counties, I should say. Small heath. This has never been a particularly rare butterfly, as you can see from the book period and then the most recent period. But you can see this is another one which seems to have had a good time. Though when the book was published, as you can see with the abundance chart there, I put a dark blue line in for 2015. So you can see the book was actually published when it was at a particularly low point in its abundance within the counties. And just after the book, almost encouraged by the book, I like to think, it increased its abundance, and it's slipped back a bit, and then it's gone back up, and it's slipped back a little bit. But it is still operating at several times the abundance in 2015. And even if you look back to 2011, we're still matching that. So it seems to benefit from something possibly in the climate, warmer climate, because it likes relatively short, fine grasses. Yeah, more. It's found in acid grassland. It's found in chalky grassland. But certainly there seems to be something in the environment which is suiting it. And you can particularly see, again, if we look up in the northeast of the county, where we've got a pretty solid block of blobs, many of which are red, and compare that to the 2011-15 period, when the book was published, where you can see, apart from Thurfield Heath, which is the little T shape of blobs in the northeast, there wasn't a great deal else. If anything, it seems to have declined slightly in the southern part of Middlesex, so it's certainly increased in some of the more urban areas. So this is a success story, and this was one of the few butterflies last year which I think probably did quite well. And I always have to include the brimstone in these talks, because this is the butterfly that doesn't change. It doesn't seem to matter what's thrown at it. It keeps going. You can see it goes up. It has peaks and troughs in its abundance, but it almost always goes back. It might go down a year, it'll go up, and certainly this spring there seem to be plenty of adults have come out of hibernation, and you can see that its distribution is pretty much across the whole of our area. It should also be remembered that probably 2020 to 2024, there are probably more people recording. So some of those gaps, the white bits in the 2011 to 2015 map, may have represented areas that weren't well recorded rather than absence of the brimstone. It's an extremely mobile butterfly. But you can see that particularly across Middlesex, the southern half below the 00 line on the map, roughly, there's hardly an empty square. So it's equally at home in urban and rural settings. And I think the encouragement to people to plant the buckthorns, its larval food plant, in their gardens and parks, and quite a lot has been done, has probably encouraged its success. Now, let's have a look at a migrant as an example of what can happen. The red admiral. You can see that I've actually put a trend line on this abundance just to show it's upwards, but that's because most of it is to do with migration. That is really not to do with conditions in this country. But it's worth remembering that increasingly we get records, though perhaps not so much this year, of more and more flying in November, December, January, February, March, which must represent ones which have managed to overwinter principally as adults in this country. We know that they can come out of hibernation in warm, sunny weather in the middle of winter if you suddenly get a mild spell, which is probably something that none of the other hibernating butterflies can do. It doesn't hibernate so deeply as others, and it seems to be able to go back into that diapause, as it's called, if the weather does go off. 2023 was a remarkable year. There's obviously a huge amount of migration and breeding. It was the kind of thing that reached the national press. I know I did an interview on BBC about it. Its ubiquity, particularly in the late summer. And so a lot of the records in the 2020 to 2024 map represent that huge coverage where there's hardly anywhere where the red admiral wasn't seen. And you can see it was rarely one. It was generally numbers were seen in one place. Again, including right up into many of the more arable desert areas where there are fewer flowers for them to feed on. But of course, its ability to come into this country each year does depend on what goes on in southern Europe. So we'll see what happens there. It went down quite a lot last year, though not historically low, but it'll be interesting to see how things go with this. Right, this is where things start going downhill. This is the small tortoiseshell, and this is the cover star of this year's report, simply because it's had suffered such a huge decline since the book was published. If you look at 2015 on the chart, you can see it wasn't at quite its peak, and that represented quite a recovery after 2012 when it also got very low, but it was doing pretty well. But you can see, even without the trend line, that numbers have gone down in abundance every year, and 2024 halved 2023's abundance. Very many people said they hadn't seen one last year. I think I only saw one in Hertfordshire, and there are very few reports this year. Now, obviously, the overwintering ones are adults, and so if not many went into hibernation last year, you're not going to get many in the spring. Whether they will be able to, the few that come out will be able to find a mate and breed successfully, we don't know. It's difficult to know exactly what the reason is. A number of theories have been put forward. One of the interesting things is that this used to be one of the later flying butterflies. Would fly right into the autumn, was a common sight, as you can see in that photograph, on Michaelmas daisies, for instance, which obviously don't flower till September generally. It seems to have gone into hibernation the same way that the peacock does, what seems to us to be very early in the year, when in early August, when it's still warm, sunny, there's plenty of food. The peacock manages it. It's evolved to do that. Whether the small tortoiseshell, because of general warmer climate, has decided to go into hibernation earlier, but can't build up its fat stocks, fat reserves to manage to successfully get through hibernation, I don't know. It's just one theory, but clearly it is a problem. Earlier, the earlier decline in the earlier parts of this century was put down at least partly to parasitism from a fly called Sturmia bella, but that seems to have got into equilibrium, at least with the small tortoiseshells. No sign of it being a major predator of it now. So quite what has caused this is still an open question. But if I was worried about any one species in Hertfordshire and probably across much of England, it would be the small tortoiseshell. I know the big butterfly count recorded, not surprisingly, similar results to our counts. So very worrying what's happened to that since the book was published. The book would say it was common, but I certainly couldn't call it a common butterfly at the moment. Common blue, you can see that when the book was published, it was at a fairly low ebb, and then in the second, just after the book, between 2016 and 2019, it had a great time. Its numbers went up and up, and then they've started to decline again. By no means absent, but you can see that the numbers have gone right down. And again, people do comment on how few colonies they're finding at places. And worryingly, given that we have fair coverage of recorders now, you can see some rather large holes opening in the distribution. Again, we seem to get more people recording up in the northeast, or maybe other things. Planting a bird's foot trefoil is helping them up in the northeast. But there's a disturbingly big gap in southeast Hertfordshire, which wasn't there before. And even in the central part of Hertfordshire, I guess that's up north of Harpenden and towards the border, there are some gaps growing. So it's a bit worrying what's going on with the common blue. Grizzled skipper is one of our more threatened butterflies. Really, it's in brownfield sites in East Hertfordshire up the Bean Valley, and also at Albury Knowers on the Chalk, two completely different environments. Last year was a bad year for it, and you can see, looking at the abundance chart, that round about 2015 something happened. So up to when the book was published, we seem to be doing quite well. Now we're not. Now some of that will be down to possibly coverage of the Albury Knowers transect, which is one of the few transects where it occurs, declining. But it is also recorded on transects at Waterford Heath, which is in the Bean Valley, the red blobs over in the sort of centre east of the county. But you can see that there hasn't been too much change there over 2020 to 2024 in terms of numbers, or at least that's maximum numbers. But I can say because Waterford Heath is very close to where I live, although we found quite a few eggs last year, myself and Liz Goodyear, particularly examining agrimony plants, we never found any larval tents formed by the caterpillars. Even going back to leaves which had several eggs on them, there was no sign of larval development. This butterfly will start flying, especially if we keep on with the mild weather, probably by mid-April, and then through May. So we're soon going to know what the result is of what's going on. We are working with landowners at other sites, but it is a bit of an uphill struggle because the conditions that they need with a lot of bare, warm ground are very difficult to maintain, with increasing scrubbing over and just general growth of grasses and so on. White Admiral is another big concern. Around about 2015, as I say, when the data for the book was it was being recorded, you can see it was doing quite well in abundance, and it was recorded at quite a few sites, 2011 to 2015. Although there seemed to be a similar number of dots, remember that the 2020 to 2024 is cumulative, and it's certainly not been recorded at some sites in 2023, 2024, where it was once common, and even at sites where it's still recorded, it's been very low. For instance, the White Admiral at Bulls Wood, which is the site that I record at, I don't think anyone saw more than one individual at one time, and I did not record it on the transect. All we have there are casual sites. Hasn't been recorded at Simon's Hyde Great Wood in the centre of the county for a few years. The only place where it does seem to be doing better is in the west at excuse me, Whippendale Woods, just west of Watford. and also at a new site, Potter's Crouch, which is near Bedmond, not too far from Hemel Hempstead. They were probably may have always been there at Potter's Crouch, but that site is threatened by golf course development, and the area that is suitable for them in that wood is quite small. And even at other sites like Broxbourne Woods, where they were once easy to find, they're being found in much smaller numbers. And this is something that unfortunately is happening right across southeast England. And it is rather worrying. There seems to be a westward migration out of the county. And I think even at Bricket Wood, which was its stronghold, the numbers have gone down a lot over recent years. And again, it's not clear why this is, whether it's climatic, because many of these woods have had work done on them to try and keep the rides open. And certainly we're working with the Wildlife Trust at Bulls Wood to make improvements. But you get to the point where you make improvements, but if the numbers, the reservoir, so to speak, of adults that were available to breed over the last few years is so small, you can make the improvements, but the butterfly may no longer be there to take advantage of them. Chalk Hill Blue, another chalk specialist. This is quite interesting. You look at 2011 to 2015, which was the period up to the book, and it's quite interesting because as well as all the ones that were seen along the chalk edge, Albury Knowers, Thurfield Heath, Hexton Chalk Pit, which are quite clearly stand out with the red blobs on the northern part of the county. There were lots of odd sightings all through the county. And that was because 2013, 2014, 2015 represented an amazing expansion in the numbers of Chalk Hill Blue. Something then really benefited them. And so there are existing sites which are all relatively small. The males particularly just burst out of those sites and started spreading across the county in obviously a pretty well unsuccessful attempt to find any new haunts where there was horseshoe vetch and chalky grassland. The females don't tend to expand in the same way. So you can see in the current period that it's retreated back to those chalky areas, and the numbers have gone into decline. You can see again, I put a bar of when the book was published. So up to the book, it was doing pretty well. And since then, it has bumped along the bottom. And last year was not good at any of its sites. We lost any records at Ashwell Chalk Pit, which was a site they expanded to when we had those huge numbers. And it was seen in low numbers, certainly at Hexton and some of the parts of Thurfield Heath. Though it's still easy to find there, but the actual relative abundance is very much lower, and we don't exactly know why. But what was interesting, at one time in the earlier part of the century, collectors used to, as it describes in my book in quite a lot of detail, collectors used to go up to Thurfield Heath, or Royston Heath as it was called in those days, to collect all the interesting variants that were found there. And in recent years, there's been very little sign of that. Everything that has been flying has tended to be the basic species. But there is a variant which I was very pleased to find last year, which is a female with a significant number of blue scales on the wings. I've never seen that variant before. It is named, and I can't remember what the aberration is called. But it is good to know that there are still some interesting forms of it up there. And luckily not hordes of people with nets wanting to stick a pin through it. And that's really the end of the talk. So I just want to thank you for watching and listening, and again give thanks for all the people who have recorded butterflies since my book was published and contribute to the annual report, help me with number crunching, and make butterfly recording such a big thing. It's certainly one of the things that our branch is very good at. And I should also give thanks and acknowledgement to my predecessor as county recorder, John Murray, who really got transects going in this county when they were just butterfly conservation's transects, rather than being incorporated in UK BMS, which came along a little bit later when it absorbed a lot of unofficial transects, if you like. and he was a recorder. He started the annual reports, and it's I can't. I'm building on his work, and his work was immense. So I would like to put that on record as part of this talk. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Andrew. That was really fantastic talk. We are hopefully going to be able to ask you a few questions. I think if you want to ask a question, can you either raise your hand by on the React part of the bar at the bottom, or you alternatively type it in the chat function, and I'll read it out. But I think we've got one or two things in the chat already. And Joe Maddox has said, Andrew, that visited Tower Hamlets Cemetery Park a couple of weeks ago and was told the chalk habitat there is going to be lost owing to yet more high-rise building that will overshadow the site, which I wasn't aware of. I don't know whether you've heard anything about that or know if there's anything that can be done.
No, I haven't heard about that. I'll have to have a word with oh gosh, terrible memory for names. I know Terry Lyle, or
Terry, yeah.
yeah, and find out what's going on there. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me given the amount of high-rise building that's going on in Tower Hamlets, but it's difficult to remember because that site was, if I remember correctly, the area is next to one of the railway embankments.
Yeah.
But I can't really visualize. That's something I'll have to find out about. It's not something I'd heard of, but it would be interesting to find out. Though with the changes in planning rules and so on at the moment, who knows whether anything can be done. Oh, Bow Common Land Gasworks, right? Yeah, I will find out more about that because that's not something I've heard of.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that would be great because I mean the branch does on occasions object to planning applications when they're likely to have an adverse effect on butterflies. For example, Andrew mentioned a golf course development at Potter Crouch, which we've been one of the main objectors for, and I think have managed to get about 800 other people to to lodge objection to that planning application, which has sat with St Albans Council for about the last 18 months with nothing happening to it. But we're very much on top of that, and yeah, we don't go around frivolously objecting to planning applications, but as and when there is something that is threatening to a good butterfly site, we will definitely get involved with it. And we have both Andrew and I mentioned the local nature recovery strategy, which we've in fact got two of, one for Hertfordshire and one for Greater London, both of which are trying to record both existing good sites and potential sites for habitat development. The branch has put a lot of work into helping the people writing those plans to identify all the current good and potentially good butterfly sites there are in the two counties, and we've probably submitted several hundred sites altogether to the to those plans with the strong requests that they be kept in good shape, and hopefully being in the plan will be a way of they can attract funding to improve management and create better habitats going forward. Okay, so yes, Priscilla's saying the Friends of Tower Hamlets lost to the council over the building's height lowered. Well, I think that yeah, it certainly won't help if the site is shaded, though not necessarily completely fatal. Um, yeah,
right. Yeah. No,
okay.
it's interesting because seeing the comment there that they thought the planks for 4 years. I must admit that was not something. And yeah, I do keep in touch with Ken, but basically to say, have you have you put your Transect records in? But no one's ever mentioned, and I've not heard about that. It's unfortunate,
Mm,
really, because I'm not saying our presence in objecting would have made any difference, but one feels that we could have at least put our oar in.
Well, I think just writing the book seems to have had a major impact on quite a number of the butterfly species, according to those charts you've just shown us. So I don't think we should underestimate. I mean, we certainly have had quite a bit of success in terms of sticking up for sites. I mean, whether
Oh,
it's
of
all down
course,
to us or not, but the things like Warren Farm in London, we were
mm,
quite instrumental in championing that, which
indeed.
was threatened
Yes,
by developments with from Ealing Council, which
yeah, I
subsequently
think we
backed
were the
down.
first conservation organisation to take them seriously and actually go
Mm,
over there and look at the site.
yeah, I think we've certainly had we haven't succeeded in stopping Tottenham Hotspur building at Enfield, but we've certainly they've radically revised their plans. So if it does go through in the end, it will become a butterfly paradise. The bits they're not building on, they couldn't bend over backwards far enough to promise all sorts of high quality butterfly habitat on the site adjoining to their proposed new training ground. Um, okay, I'm not seeing any hands up or any other comments. Davin says he really enjoyed the talk. Are there any ways of doing transects or something similar when a weekly commitment is not viable, Andrew?
Absolutely. Oh yes. Thanks for asking that, Davin. I didn't prime him to ask that question, but
That sounds like a planting question to
no,
me.
it's
Go
not,
on.
not at all. Um, we have actually over the last few years sort of launched a reduced effort survey, which is basically monthly from May to September, where there is a problem with other weekly commitments not viable or where we haven't got necessarily many volunteers. I was discussing that sort of surveying today up at the area Natural England have bought at Hexton. And to some extent, I mean, I'm trying to encourage at one or two other sites where people say, oh, we'd like to do a transect. Because I think one of the problems is that not everyone really grasps what a commitment it is to do a transect week after week during the summer. And sometimes, particularly just to get information on a monthly basis with various things, like someone doesn't go up on May the 31st and June the 1st and say I've recorded for 2 months. There are various safeguards there, so absolutely yes. I think I should probably write something for the newsletter about that, but if anyone on this call is interested in that sort of recording, um, then I would be very happy to talk to them about it.
Yeah, I mean, we have been running a number of targeted recording schemes in particular areas where we're partnering with organisations that are doing good habitat management. I mean, Transport for London have been managing their road verges, or some of them for butterflies for the last few years, and we've had about 40 or 50 sites that we've had volunteer recorders monitoring the butterflies on them, which again is by the sort of 4 surveys a year method, and that's been really interesting because last year when butterflies everywhere else were going down, the plots that TFL had been managing well for more than one year, the butterfly numbers actually went up by 75%. So it was rather than down. So it was a really conclusive evidence that stopping grass cutting and putting some wildflower seeds in was a brilliant way of encouraging butterflies, as if we didn't know it already. But it's really inspired TFL, who are now doubling the number of sites that they're managing for butterflies, because they as an organization have requirements to improve biodiversity, so they're going up from 26 hectares to 52 hectares by next year of road verges that are managed for butterflies, and that's going to be a very significant thing. And the fact that we're doing the recording and recording such good results has been instrumental in getting them to make that increase. So the recording really is helpful. And similarly with St Albans Council, we've had a similar initiative going with them for several years, which also last year showed a significant increase in butterflies on the sites that have been going for more than one year, bucking the main trend. So. Yeah. anyone that wants to record butterflies in their local area, we're always really keen, and Andrew will undoubtedly have somewhere on his list for you to record. So
Yes,
cool.
and it doesn't have to be formal I mean, obviously, formal recording, give is a commitment. But obviously, anyone who just wants to send records in or put records in is more than welcome. But obviously, the formal recording, you've got added value.
Mm. Yeah, well, it's always great to record butterflies. I saw a peacock in my garden this at lunchtime, and checked in my shed, and it had come out of there. I've had four peacocks hibernating over the winter this year. All four have made it, which is actually quite unusual. I usually lose at least one of them to spider predation. But all four have made it, and today was the first day that one had come out and flown. So it's a true start to the butterfly season. So probably should also say it's I usually on average over the last 10 years I've had 20 small tortoise shells, and this year I've got zero, which rather backs up what Andrew was saying about the butterfly having completely crashed and burned locally. But, so I think we've probably come to the end. I haven't got any more questions in the chat. I can't see any hands raised. I'm hoping that I will see lots of you at Members' Day on April the 12th, and I hope that you all see loads of butterflies this summer. And yeah, certainly report them into us through the app or any of the other channels, and we'll make use of the information to not only compile our annual report, but also to try and liaise with landowners and managers and get them to do good things for their butterflies on their sites. So many thanks to Andrew, and many thanks to all of you for watching. I think we've had still got over 90% of the audience that was here at the start. So it's a sad sign of a good talk that people can stay to the end of questions. So thanks very much for coming. Thanks very much to Andrew. The recording will be on YouTube tomorrow morning. If you want to share it with anyone that else that you think might be interested, then please do. But for now, that's the end of our winter Zoom series, and goodbye.